David Brucey here with another 3 for All, and this is 3 Jeff Loomis Licks from 2018. And Jeff Loomis is an exciting and monstrous metal and shred guitarist. And a lot of people kind of became aware of him with the group Nevermore. And I've got a couple quick stories to tell. So I remember I bought the Gigantor DVD that had Dream Theater and Megadeth. This was like 10 years ago or longer. So I bought the DVD and I took it home, and I really wanted to see, some of that footage. And I wasn't really familiar with Nevermore. And I put it on and I started kind of skipping through some of the material. And when I got to Nevermore, I listened to it. And I wasn't really a big fan of the singer, but I loved the guitarist. I was like, who is this blonde-haired, flamethrower over there? And it actually prevented me from watching the footage I actually wanted to see, which was Megadeth and Dream Theater. And I sat there and I kept rewinding, and watching, and it's like, man, this guy is really good. And then he was on my radar, and I went out and bought, some Nevermore. I started buying his solo albums, and now he works with Arch Enemy, and I'm also a big Arch Enemy fan. I love Michael Amott and Chris too, Christopher Amott. Wages of Sin, that album rules. I also met Jeff briefly at Summer NAMM in Nashville, Tennessee. That would have been like 2014. And I'll never forget, I went to the NAMM, and when I walked in the convention center, I could hear Jeff Loomis on the other end of the convention center. There's all the noise, and people are banging drums and checking microphones and whatever, and there's all that random, convention NAMM noise. And I could hear it. I was like, I think that's Jeff Loomis. And then I made, a beeline straight for where it was coming from. And sure enough, he was rocking out at the Schecter booth. And there was a big crowd of people. I'll never forget, I captured that little moment there with my phone and got a photo and an autograph and talked to him for a minute, and told him, I was a big fan, I loved his guitar playing. And then I walked away. There was a huge crowd of people. There was like 50 or 60 people, waiting. And so I got my photo and the autograph, and then I left and I started making my rounds. And then it was like a half hour, 45 minutes later, I walked by the Schecter booth again. And everybody was gone. I mean, the reps were still there, but Jeff Loomis was sitting there at a chair on his phone, and he was like texting, and there were all these people just walking by. And when I looked over there, I was like, man, he's just sitting there by himself, and nobody was really, bugging him. And at first I was a little intimidated. I thought, well, maybe this isn't a good time. Like, maybe he's doing something. And he just kind of looked up, and he was like, hey, man. And I said, hey, are you busy? And he was like, no, come on over. And then we started talking again. And I'll never forget, I thought it was so weird. There we were at the NAMM. There was hundreds, if not thousands of people, just wandering around. And he was sitting there texting on his phone by himself, and he looked really bored. And then when he spotted me and we started talking again, he got all perked up and excited. And I thought, man, Jeff Loomis is cool. He's like a normal, regular guy. Until he, picks up a guitar, and then he just completely melts your face with this crazy, shred guitar antics. The licks and examples in this lesson actually come from a bootleg from Sweden in 2018. And it was a live, kind of just filmed on somebody's phone, it looked like, out in the crowd. I'm going to break down a few of the things that he was doing during that clip, and then at the end of this lesson, I'm going to add this crazy string skipping diminished idea that's in the style of Jeff Loomis. I mean, it literally comes right from his fingers, but it's not from the same bootleg. So Stick around for the end because there's some insane stuff at the end of this lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to be tuned down 2 whole steps. So your low E string is going to, be moving from E all the way down to a C. So we're way down there. You could maybe, set up a guitar and kind of put bigger strings on it. I mean, we're almost kind of in baritone territory here. That's a really, really detuned, set of strings. So I didn't really go up a set of strings. These are still just 10 to 46 on my guitar. But, definitely give your guitar a chance to kind of acclimate to that tuning because it's a lot lower than standard tuning. This first idea, it's basically out of E Harmonic Minor. And he's playing this melody on the G string. And he's also using the B and the high E string open. So it creates this droning, kind of ringing melodic sound, but it's really cool. And sometimes I'll practice, scales or ideas like this where I'll play something on one string and then allow other strings to ring. Sometimes it's the top strings, but I usually find myself doing this with the bottom strings. Like maybe I'll hit the low E string and allow that to ring, and then I'll kind of play over the top of it. And this is kind of the reverse because now we're going to be playing, the B and the high E open. So we're going to start with A. And we're basically going from A to B right there and kind of picking through those open strings. And then right there we just played A, B to C. There's D sharp, and we're getting ready to, basically hit the root, which is E. And the melody itself, it actually kind of reminds me of melodies from Star Wars. Kind of sets up that melody, then he starts it again and moves from A to B, and then he basically starts sweeping, and he's kind of doing almost like a little circle picking or circle sweeping kind of motion. And there I'm really just doing a down sweep and then an up sweep. And also make sure you're in tune because you could hear it got a little sour up there. There we go. But that's an interesting, little segment there of this. All right, up next, this is E Hirajoshi lick. And Hirajoshi is actually a Japanese scale. And there's different spellings of the scale, almost like there's different, modes. So you're kind of starting, in different parts of the scale, but it's a 5-note scale, just like a pentatonic. But the structure is radically different than the typical, minor pentatonic scale. So it's E Hirajoshi, and we've got E to F, and then A, B, and C. And he basically starts running through this, connecting octaves. So there's the first octave, and then jump up an octave and do the exact same thing. E, F, A, B, C. Jump up another octave, and there it is again. Now think of, Marty Friedman, Jason Becker. There's a lot of guitarists that have played with Hirajoshi. So when he plays through it, it's something like this. And you can see he's basically playing a little melodic phrase. And then in this tuning, when you do this middle lick, you know, make sure don't bend too far, because we're tuned down so low, you really don't have to push the string very far to bend it in this tuning. And then he basically moves up to the next octave. And then he starts doing a speed lick right there. And it's an interesting phrase because it's a 5-note sequence, but you're playing it like this. So it almost feels like one of Nuno Betancourt's pivot licks, but there's an extra note in there, you know, that B way up there. And then basically move from there back to the lower position, and then the lower position, and he kind of slides off there on the low E string. Lick, this is actually a little piece of a classical theme, and this is from CPE Bach's, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Solfeggio? I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, but Solfeggio in C minor, it's a famous, you know, CPE Bach piece, and CPE Bach is actually J.S. Bach's son. I think it was like his 5th son, and this isn't a very popular opinion, but actually I think CPE Bach is better than his dad. And I know, you know, Johann Sebastian Bach is obviously the big Bach that everybody knows. But his son was phenomenal, and you're probably going to recognize this. So he's just kind of, you know, tapping into that melody. He's not playing it exact. But he's definitely flirting or kind of hinting at that famous melody. And you can hear he kind of did like a Marty Friedman bend in there. Like right there, kind of bending from E flat into E and then back to E flat. I guess you could also think of that as D sharp too, if we're thinking harmonic minor. And then a really typical, you know, series of harmonics there too. That's really cool. I love, you know, when shred and, you know, rock and hard rock and metal guitarists, I love when they tap into classical themes like that. All right, here's a bonus lick for this lesson, and this didn't come from the bootleg that I found. But I really couldn't put together a Jeff Loomis, you know, 3-for-all and not show some terrifying, crazy lick. And, you know, Jeff is very well known for doing these insane sweeps. I mean, he's just a brilliant guitarist, just a monster, you know, relentless flamethrower guitarist. But, you know, sweeps, he does these crazy, you know, diminished and harmonic minor and Phrygian dominant, you know, runs and all this just crazy stuff. But he does these really sick, like string-skipped, diminished arpeggios, and that's what this idea is going to be. And it's stretchy, and I'm going to kind of share a bunch of variations, so you can sit there and kind of play with this idea, and you can create tons of variations of this for days. So we're going to be flirting with E diminished, basically, like this. So there's your, you know, your E, your G, your B flat. And then when we hop over to the high E string, there's your D flat, your E, and your G. Okay. Now the cool thing right there is there's a D flat hiding right there on the 11th fret on the D string. So we can come down that arpeggio and grab that as a note from the arpeggio and then turn it around and go back up. So you can kind of use that note as a pivot note, you know, to turn that arpeggio around. That kind of thing. And then, you know, if we go down 3 more frets, you know, if you go down a minor third lower, you'll find there's a B flat right there. And, you know, we could hike back and grab it right there on the 8th fret, but the smarter way to do this would be to grab that note on the 13th fret there on the A. So now we can alternate the pivot note. So we can come down the arpeggio and grab D flat, go back up, and then come down that arpeggio and then grab B flat right there, like this. That's a sick lick. Now, one thing you could do, obviously, since it's diminished, is we could move that around in minor thirds. And you could take the exact same thing we just did right there. Move it up a minor third. So now you're going to be on 12, 15, and 18. And then you can actually go up another minor third. And then now you're going to be on 15, 18, and 21. Now, one more thing you can do if you really want to get sick with this. And Jeff Loomis is a sick guitarist, so you definitely want to try this. We can keep that same variation, and then if you really want to expand it, you could actually add a tap note up on the 18th fret there on the high E string. For this crazy variation, we're going to come down the arpeggio without tapping, grab D flat, go back up the arpeggio, and then that's when you're going to tap that B flat up on the 18th fret there. After you tap, then come back down and then grab B flat on the A and go back up. And then you repeat that whole pattern. So really slowly, it's like this. And I really like that lick, it's crazy. Alright, that's going to wrap this look at 3 licks from Jeff Loomis. And Jeff is a very dynamic and exciting and expressive and just terrifying guitarist. You know, he's appeared on a lot of, you know, guest appearances on albums. And, you know, one of my favorite solos of his, every time I hear it, I just stop in my tracks and I turn it up as loud as it'll go. But the song Race Car by Periphery. And he did a guest appearance on that song. And Race Car is like a 13 or what, 15-minute long song or something. It's massive. And, you know, there's so many like variations and rhythm and all this just hard-hitting, just crazy, you know, gent metal. And then when Jeff comes in and plays that solo, it just, I mean, it just makes me just stop, you know, and it's almost like I lose my breath or something. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. And, yeah, really dynamic and great guitarist. But anyway, leave some feedback and some comments, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more lessons and material. Thank you.